Hi, everybody. I am pleased to introduce Lan Tuazon, who is here with us tonight. She flew in today from Chicago, Illinois, where she lives and works. Lan was born in Pampanga, Philippines, and is currently assistant professor of sculpture at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. We were lucky to have her here this semester since she is a Rome Prize winner and will travel to Rome as an affiliated fellow at the American Academy in Rome. Congratulations, Lan. Lan has exhibited internationally at the Neue Gallery in the Imperial Palace of Austria, Bucharest Biennale 4, WKV Kunsterwein, oh boy, Kusterwein in Germany, the Lowry Museum in London. She has had solo exhibitions of her work at the Brooklyn Museum, Storefront of Art and Architecture in New York, Young World Inc. in Detroit, Julius Caesar in Chicago, and the Visual Arts Center in Texas. She was awarded Artist in Residence and fellowships at the Academy Schloss Solitude, Headlands Art Center, Civitella Ranieri in Italy, Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago. Significant group shows include 8th Floor Rubin Foundation and Artist Space in New York City, Red Cat Gallery in Los Angeles, Canada Gallery, New York City, Sculpture Center on Long Island City, Apex Art, New York City, Exit Art, also New York City, and a group show also at WKV Kunstlerwein and Kunstlerhaus in Stuttgart, Germany, Shiva Gallery, Essex Flowers, Momenta Art and Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago. She has her Bachelor's of Art from Cooper Union and an MFA from Yale, and the Whitney Independent Program, and attended the Whitney Independent Program. Help me to welcome Lan Tuazon.
Hey guys, thanks for turning up and showing up and stuff. Thank you for the invitation, Rebecca. I'm happy to be here. I've always been curious about Cranbrook and the kind of work that you guys do here. So I consider it an honor to get to know you guys very much. So I have put together a lecture for you. It's pretty much recent works. And I slipped in a few things in there that I hope could be considerations for you in the future in terms of making art. Okay. So some of the works that I've been doing, I've considered my work in the last 10 years to be a trilogy, and I'm not going to show you a trilogy that you're like, oh no, that sounds like more than 30 minutes. I'm not going to show you a trilogy. I'm going to show you the tail end, the conclusion of it, which is the project that is the subject of the lecture. But I was thinking about the order of things. I think a lot about the way we structure and classify different forms of life, and how Western culture is really the creation of a taxonomy of how it creates categories of different types of humans, right? I'm an anthropology geek because there were so many traumatic facts of anthropology that I really took a deep dive in all of in anthropology. And some of the things I was thinking about in anthropology was they don't come up with terms like multiculturalism. They come up with terms like multinaturalisms, meaning different ways of understanding nature. And so just to briefly say that the trilogy that I did was like trying to figure out how to shift the order of things. It started out with the built environment and how the built environment erases our history. Then it went into the museum to talk about how certain cultures get relegated in the past. And then I kind of thought that this is a bummer. It's all about power structures and ideology. So I want to think about a different container of possibility. And I started to think a lot about the planet as a container. I made a work that's called Future Fossils, and it was something that that I started to think about, and I was like, isn't it funny how we kind of like begin with the open world, and then we start to think continentally, then we start to think in nation states, then we start to think, and somehow we have learned how to divide and make our world smaller. And so out of like some kind of instinct, I kind of like started to think about spaces and started to kind of nest them together to really talk about the philosophical the philosophical possibilities of thinking about the world and how it gets smaller. One of the ways I thought about that was something that I knew very well, because if you're a child in the Philippines, you're born in the Philippines, and the first thing the doctor does is to hand over your umbilical cord to the mother. And this umbilical cord is wrapped in a gauze, and it looks kind of like a tea bag. And that tea bag hangs in the corner of the room. And you basically grow up looking at this tea bag, and it's such a mystery because you're like, I think that's part of my body. It's kind of creepy. But as you get older, it kind of starts to dawn on you that you're like, oh, it's my umbilical cord, because first I was in the womb and now I'm in a room. And then if you're capable of connecting that your bedroom is now a larger womb that you're in, then you start to think not how spaces collapse, but how spaces multiply. And then you start to think that if I'm in a room, then I'm in a house, then I'm in a region, then I'm in a country. And then it kind of just has this moment of blowing your mind that you're just some little thing in a larger container of the planet. And so I wanted to take a little time to tell you this little Filipino cultural practice of how it is that this cosmology works out in this kind of like small island country, of how they connect the concept of mother and nature. So I followed my kind of like my onioning practice of just starting to think about containers. And you might say, gee, how did you make that jump from like the womb to containers? And I started to think about like, if people had this kind of orientation to the womb, then perhaps they wouldn't have like this kind of very disposable idea about their relationship to the material world. So for example, this is a water bottle. It will deliver my water to me at this moment, but then I will throw it and it will be permanently present into the landscape, right? And so in a way, I started to think about the womb, the plastic container, the planet, as all of these kinds of representative of spaces. So I'm going to put a pin on that for a second and show you the works on the screen are called Future Fossils, False Fruits. It just so happens to be a very human preoccupation that we really like to create containers in the shapes of fruits. Then these are future fossils, liquid commodities, and that is plentiful. Most of the time, the thing that we deliver in containers are absolutely oil, gas, and water. These are the liquids that really dominate like the order of our lives. The next thing is that these are a huge archive. I'm a sculptor, so like I do have object fixation. I can look at a Tupperware in a thrift store and just be like, holy cow. It's like a chronotope. Look at this Tupperware. My grandmother had that orange color. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, this is circa 1972. And so part of it is just geeking out about like these objects that are so everyday, so mundane and common, but yet they kind of really do speak of a very particular timestamp of our everyday lives. So I collect them, I split them in half, and then I nest them. So when I take these containers and I cut them bilaterally, it is absolutely to start to think about how I could sort of orient a common container along the lines of bisecting it laterally as if it was a body. When I start to nest and onion them, I do start to think about now about how can I tell time? Like, how do I build a notion of durational time? When people look at these like future fossil pieces, they're like, it's so confusing because it's like, it's almost like a diagram or a photograph. And I want to pitch this as a kind of potential word to you is that, you just make things up in the studio. You're like, documentary sculpture. Is there such a thing? How can we think about sculpture in the fourth dimension? And I start to think about that. I used to be a photographer, and part of the criteria of a photographer is, number one, to be there, to be witness, and then last is to document. And so I was trying to think about the sculpture as a document as well. I want you to know this archive is huge and growing, and then I had to create a kind of clerical apparatus to make them visible. These are shelves that I've designed so that when you look at them, you're almost looking at them at an angle that you would encounter a book. When the sculptures kind of outgrow the shelves, they leave the shelves and they become freestanding objects. And when they become freestanding objects, they can grow into scale. Now, it's kind of funny to begin at this handheld scale and to start to think along the lines of industrial scale. This is a water tank that's about 8 feet tall, but then it doesn't stop because basically everything becomes a container then, right? That we're actually surrounded by them. Anyway, I gave my mom a call and I was like, so I wanted to, do a little firsthand research, Mom, is there any other cultural practices that I should think about aside from the umbilical cord? It's really been very helpful for me to kind of think about cultural traditional practices as a way of something like thinking about the future. I started out the work with future fossils, of imagining what our world would be like sometime in like the far future. And it's interesting that the first instinct I had was to kind of like think about Filipino cultural practices. So she goes, oh yeah, I was like, what were the other things that you did to kind of help me to kind of like help think about what it means to bring a child into the world and what kind of personality they would develop? And I had read that if you wanted a child to be creative, you would get a coconut. And what you would do is split the coconut, open it up, and you would rip a book from a story, or rip a page from a storybook, or rip a page from a songbook, and you put a song in the coconut. If you want your child to be a writer, you put a pen in there. And if you want them to be an artist, you put an empty page in there. And then one more thing is, if you want the child to travel in the future, you would send a coconut down a river. Right? And then one last thing is, if you didn't want your child to, this is messed up, but if you didn't want your child to travel away from home too far, you would bury the coconut in the front of your house, right? So when I had called her and I said, could you please confirm, is that true? It's coming from a book. Did you guys really do that? And she was like, you bet your You bet your ass we did that. Of course we did that. Why else do you think you're an artist? You know, like, of course we did that. I take full responsibility. I absolutely took a page from a songbook. I absolutely put a pencil in there and put a page in there. We really take full responsibility for the fact that you're an artist today. And then I was like, and did you send it down the river? And then she was like, nope, we didn't send it down the river. We buried it in front of the house. And I'm so sorry, she says, because we buried it too deep. And that is something you're not really supposed to do, because if you bury it too deep, the child will not speak. And then I was like, what? And then she was like, yeah, you didn't speak for 3 to 4 years. And so I'm so sorry about that. I didn't mean to bury it too deep. And then I was like, wow, that's super fascinating. And so I was like, so you buried it in a coconut, right? And she was like, no, I didn't. We didn't have a coconut. And I was like, what are you talking about that you didn't have a coconut? It's the Philippines. She goes, no. That day we just had some pineapple. We opened up a can of Dole canned pineapple, and it just happened to be empty. So we put all of that and buried it in front of the house. And I was like, Mom, do you have any idea what you've done? Are you aware that I make art about containers? Like, you put me in a Dole tin can? And you know, she was like, you know, Lan, you're like making a lot out of this. She's like, I don't understand what seems to be the problem here. And I was like, well, because it's a coconut, you know, it's all natural. It's a nice brown color. It's one of the best containers there is. She's like, yeah, but so is the Dole can. And it occurred to me, I was like, oh, right. Because we actually replicate the hierarchies of things that have value and things that don't have value. So like organic, yay. Tin can, no. And so I was thinking a lot about this in terms of how we really create, how we really simplify a complicated world, right? First we idealize it, then we rationalize it, and then we normalize it. We like coconuts because they're biodegradable. We don't like tin cans because they're of human culture. Anyway, so I thought we need a much more complicated view of the world. And one of the things that I kind of think about is the major separation that occurs between nature and culture. Right? There seems to be a divide that's being done. Nature is always in the background of human activities. We never ever think about it. But here's the thing. Nature is not pretty resolved and happy to stay in its place, right? Obviously, things are not staying in their place. And when we take this little bottle and we throw it away, it's not like the currents are not going to bring it right back. It's just a kind of constant reminder that there is only one container. And so some of the things that has really inspired me to think, both as a professor of sculpture and also as an artist, is to really pay attention to the new monsters that are shaking up our world's orders, right? When I call them monsters, it's not my term. It's what Foucault called nature returning as the foreground of our survival, as the subject of our survival. And it returns to us these evidence of nature, natural monsters. So how many people know what this image is? Okay, a few. This is a new rock that's called plastiglomerates. It literally is a new category of geological rock made out of natural sediments and plastic material. So these are the new plastic rocks. You can identify the tops of something like oil barrel cans as they kind of meld with coral, and they kind of turn into and coalesce into new entities. In some of the pieces you could see that plastics that are kind of compressed and densified together create multiple layers of plastic, and they, there's an island in Hawaii that's called Garbage Beach, and it has a huge collection of plastiglomerates. So I'm a sculptor. There's this idea that what we need nature to do is to contain our human expressions, right? So we extract and harvest wood, we extract and harvest marble, and then we fashion a resemblance, right? But how do you do that when the material that you're working with is so vibrant with a kind of warning of the present condition? Meaning, do I take a plastic glomerate and now make a sculpture of some form now? Like, could it ever be seen as a sculpture, or will it be permanently this reminder that this material has a past and it's not there to contain our human vision? It's a really good thought experiment. I asked that question for a reason, because this is kind of like my responsibility to the generation of artists that I teach. Here's another one. This is plastic, and it's probably next to a volcanic entity, and so it heats up the plastics and extrudes it. And so this is nature processing most of our human waste. With that being said, I really started to think about, well, how can I go back into my school and take a freshman all the way to senior year, or even my graduate students, and start to teach art as if it's like the 17th century, Like, why are we going to go back to that? And so there's a text, an essay that's written by Dipesh Chakrabarty, and it's the 4 Theses of Climate Crisis. And the questions are very obvious. It's like, number one, is there anything in the field of art that has prepared us to confront the climate crisis? Number two, are we acting in time? When we go into the studio and we make art, are we acting in 2023, or are we acting in the 17th century? There's more in the thesis, and it's quite complex. I highly recommend the text, but I took it to heart, and I really wanted to ask the question. If artists persist in the Enlightenment project of art for art's sake, of art as having autonomy, of never letting go of that kind of power to determine what art is, it's funny, the entire premise is that you get to say what art is, but heaven forbid if you're like, I want it to be practical. And they're like, no, we don't like that. And so in a way, I kind of wanted to delve into the question, is there meaningfulness in the practical, right? So first things first, I don't know the answer to that. So the beauty of being a professor is that I can present the question to my younger artists, and they could kind of like rethink it. They're kind of like a think tank. And so I teach a class at SEIC, and I've taught a class at Anderson Ranch where Yasmin was there, and she was one of my students. And what we actively do in the class is to try to think about materials in the circular economy. If we kind of extract materials from a kind of environment and then we throw them away, and this ends up in the landfill, it basically means that the environment is both the beginning point of material extraction and the end point of its demise, right? So if you link those two endpoints together, there's a possibility you can engage in a circular economy and produce and invent new material. There are 5 techniques of material invention. One of them is to densify a material. So it could be something like using hay to kind of like press it together into panels. The one on the left-hand side, you're right, is ground coffee grounds. Imagine a city, with 3 million people and all of the coffee shops that are open to run that city. Coffee grounds is a great amount of waste. And with the class that I teach, we've started working with it with coffee and milk glue, casein glue, and have started to make coffee clay. This is a type of material invention that's called reconfigured. It's just by the way you arrange the material, right? So I love this piece because I think it kind of like really brings home to the point that working with materials that have a past kind of gets really poetic really fast. So what you're looking at is something called newspaper wood. You take sheets of newspaper and they're laminated together back into layers, and then they are milled just like dimensional lumber. And the beautiful things is once you look at the grain, it's actually like words and letters that you would see in an article that are the new rings of that material. A third technique is called transformed. You change the material state of a material. So this is what you're looking at is a few examples of shredded plastics. And the one in the middle is a new invention called bifusion bricks. It is a cinder block that is steam pressed together. And with that, you can create new structures with it. I kind of stole a lot of budget money from a recent exhibition and took all that stolen money to buy myself some machines. I think this is a good time to let you guys know that I spent time in the Pacific Northwest, and I was raised by a hippie, not my own parent, but I was raised by a hippie, and it really fascinated me that there are a group of people in the 1970s called the appropriate technologist that wanted to think about the ways in which that we can create whole earth systems that are beneficial to our needs and to the planet. And so I bought a plastic shredder and a plastic sheet press, and now I have the means of my production, and it's free. The fourth method is that you design something. This is one of my favorite inventions that are of this type. It's called secondary use design. You may not know this, but the greatest mortality comes from waterborne diseases. And so first it has an invention as a water container to aid in the delivery of water in areas of crises. But then if we do this, and I don't know if you guys remember this, that remember Flint? In Flint, Michigan, like people would drop off so many bottles of waters and then just create like this endpoint of just like piles of plastics and stuff. But the design of this is that once you finish delivering the water, it functions as a buildable brick. So I definitely use it as my own material of making sculpture, and they create architectural spaces, and I start to think about ways of building with it and stuff. And then the last technique is cultivated. You grow it. Most people know about the use of mushrooms as a replacement for plaster, or like the replacement for mass packaging. But there are other ways in which like cultivated is grown to create concrete and tiles and stuff. So I just wanted to add that in there because I think it'll help you understand how I kind of shift gears from the fossil works to the newer works. At this point, I kind of started to think about future fossils that grow to the scale of spaces. And so the last one I showed you was a water tank, and then I thought, okay, let's take a look at a single family home. And I built the home as a space. And this time I was like, to engage the practical and to determine the meaningfulness of the practical, my test question was simple, right? The premise is this: it takes 109 tons of waste for each person to live a lifetime, right? So think about that. Every single one of us will produce 109 tons of waste. And that's a lot. So the question of this exhibition was, how much of that waste can we reabsorb into our present needs? So what you're looking at is the installation. And one of the things that it wanted to do was to kind of like test these 5 techniques of material invention. So the exhibition opened up into a material collection. There was a video that was made to kind of like help present this kind of proposal and to present this as a test site. Plastics were collected from all the audience members, plastics 2, 5, and 6. And the premise was, if the audience were willing, all of the plastics collected would be shredded and then turned into sheet press to finish the house. This is noosewood paneling that you see in some parts of the house. The secondary used design water brick to build a wall and some future fossil pieces. And the last part is these are bacteria-grown cement. And this is invented by a female architect, and it's probably one of the best examples of new material invention, because cement is kind of grown and bacteria is impregnated into the cement, and they kind of get happy in there. They eat and poop. And it's the pooping that coalesces the material into a tile. And it's one of the best ways to produce concrete because it doesn't really use heating and it reduces carbon emissions. So that was the exhibition I did 2 years ago. And then I took a little break. I wanted to rethink about containers, the art object, more formalist work, and started to think about ways that we remember things. And I started to think about, like, even like assorted drives is the type of memory drives that we have for digital files. So there used to be shared drives, flash drives, hard drives, and I kind of really like thinking about these formalist works as kind of like hard drives. And so they're pretty simple. They're made out of plexiglass, and then inside them they have shredded plastics 2 and 5. Part of the things that I kind of was trying to think about with this waste plastics was to just capture it. And some folks are like, where are you getting these designs from? I'm like, I'm a Gen X person. Those are like video game spaces in my mind, or like graphs and abstractions. I start to compose them now more and more as screens, different types of screens. And then this is another set of works. They're changing now. They contain more things, but I kind of like it because, once I arrange them, things are loose in there. So whenever they get moved around, the trash is everywhere. And I just think that's great. Things are not staying in place. I'm going to end with the thing that I'm working on more currently. There's an exhibition that I'm working on and a commission in LA. And I have always wanted to cut a shipping container. And so this is a model of a 20-foot shipping container cut in half. And the doors open to each other to create an interior courtyard. It's in the early stages, but if you take a look at this, it has a public-facing component where, again, materials collection is part of the project, and it shows the kind of cycle of how material is produced. And then on the other side, materials are going to be collected and presented and stuff. So I'm going to end it right there. I hope that was useful.
Where do you source your waste plastic for your projects? Is it like you personally hunting? I know you had some people participating and giving their waste plastic.
Mm-hmm. I do a collection at the exhibition, and then I set it up at school, so that it's not just an idea anymore. It's something that that gets institutionalized at SEIC, at school. And then I start to kind of reach out to local partners. So in the case that I showed you with the house, I worked with Ken Dunn, who is this philosopher turned waste management recycler. He actually is in the art world more than waste management. And, you know, I collect it from multiple people. So it's like in New York, in Chicago, I was partnering with 3 nonprofits to kind of collect the plastics, including plastics collected from the audience members. Then I kind of also process my own stuff, you know, like I know this is like ideas, but I'm trying to solve problems for my own life before I start presenting it for others. Like I like, you know, they gave me like a little plastic stirring thing at my airline, and I'm just like, I think I'm gonna keep this like little plastic stirrer. I just feel like so responsible that I was like, there goes that next piece of my 109 tons. So it's also the stuff that I'm using and processing.
Cool. I really appreciate, this is the most comprehensive, I guess, explanation or exhibition of like the remaking of materials from used materials, and especially like building materials and stuff like that. So I really appreciate it.
Thanks for your question.
Thanks for your lecture. It was great. Mine is practical. I'm curious about, you're talking about philosophical concerns around it. You have also really beautiful storytelling and kind of like bringing in the past and the present future. I'm curious about, and then there's also your practical, you know, things you're doing and the chemistry behind it. And I was wondering if you are doing any writing or book, any kind of, you know, book or something like that, where there's other ways that you're putting information out into the world.
Right.
I'm selfishly asking that question.
The Hyde Park Art Center is going to publish a book. I've written text about it and stuff. And, you know, I end up thinking about source and resource and what that means for the artists and stuff. I also want to kind of indicate, like, a lot of people are like, there's a lot of educational stuff in your work. And I think I have to assert that just in terms of what it means to think in terms of social relations, as an ethics of just being like, you know what, this is part of the thing that I think is important, is knowledge dissemination, storytelling, and all of that. And so the educational is most definitely a really big part of it. And so I wonder with you guys, you know, like, how do you think about it? I also was your age and I thought, I want to be a modernist. I do. I really, really do. You know how proud my mama would be for me to be a modernist and just like look at my stuff in the museum. And then I kind of started to think about this stuff a lot, you know, of what's possible. And while if you guys are going to think about a question or not, let me throw a question to you, you know, like, how do you guys think about it? Do you think people are like presently thinking about climate conditions, or is it something that you push in the back of your mind as later? Or maybe, how do you guys think about these new theories of, I was just talking to Yasmin, of like radical futurism, right? Of how the non-Western art model is actively being challenged with the way people from the oppressed classes and races are actively trying to imagine their life without power, the subjection of power, projecting themselves into the future and trying to imagine racial justice, social justice, equality, freedom, in terms of the future, right? So I kind of like this radical futurism. I'm just in a bad spot because they're like, we don't like technology there. And I'm like, oh, so I can't be both a person of color and using technology. I'm in trouble. Is there no place I can belong? But in any case, it's something to kind of think about. So I wonder, what's the materials in the studio? Do you consider this? Please let me give you the question.
Just because I've been thinking about our studio visit. So you said something during your studio visit when we were talking about radical futurism, about like radical present tense, like the present. How do you radicalize the present? And even during the summer when I saw this lecture for the first time, I very much was like, oh, this is very much a very like present way of trying to deal with the issues in a way that a lot of radical futurism is like, I'm imagining a future that is coming from the past. Whereas this is like, I have trash here. What to
and
do
it will
next.
be here in the future.
Right. But I guess I'm thinking a lot about containers and vessels, obviously because I've been thinking about vessels in my work, but also I've been thinking a lot about containers just because of the way you're physically using containers. And I'm curious about what you think about like communities as containers of like knowledge, and like how do you take this like very physical manifestation of a container and like translate it to the communities that are very much helping you bring this work to life even.
I do it like this. The exhibition that you showed had like an introduction video that documented like the active partners that are very much have stakes in these ideas. How do I transform the container into a knowledge base? I'm a sculptor too. So there's a part that I can explain, right? There's the knowledge part, all of this part with the material invention that I showed you, but I'm really after the being, that kind of like moment when you can feel what you know. And so there's a lot of things I haven't talked about in terms of the kind of physical embodied experience I'm trying to create. And that is the space that's left for you. And so I think that's the part that I'm after when these containers get bigger and bigger. My hope is that it brings people to their knees to be like, oh, I'm just a small thing with other things in a very, very big place. And that is a very philosophical thing that I'm after, because it's really much against this kind of individualism, this project of individualism. It's like, it's really about just like realizing, whoa, we're in this together, and so, did that answer your question?
It totally did, but it is leading me to ask you, like, how do you deal with the nihilism then? How do I deal with
nihilism?
Like with the cynicism of just like coming to your practice. So I'm someone who's I'm someone who's just like, I always have conversations around like material and like environment, and I'm just like, we're all gonna die soon. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's just like, it doesn't matter. But of course it matters. But then how do you deal with that from audience members? Like coming into your spaces when you're very much you're creating a radical way of making.
Yeah. So how do I deal with pessimistic audience members? Is that the question? Or like, how do I deal with my own pessimism? Right. I wonder. You guys are so strange. I think we talked about this in the studio. I think that our artists don't really get asked the permission of whether we believe in the current way the world is organized, divided and conflicted. No one asks us, right? Artists is the last experiment. It really is of this of how we're gonna wage this practice of how to be human, right? It is a job that has no description. And yet the huge thing that we're trying to figure out is, what is our relationship to the world, how do we embody this? How do we use our senses to make sense? The fact that we do that is also our ability to say, I produce knowledge and I can't be tricked that knowledge comes from the outside. And we do this in the studio all the time. It can never be undermined that we do this because we're always in charge of the experience that we're producing. Yes, we are all gonna die, and yet the sun will shine. Yes, we're all gonna die, but something beautiful will occur. I think that is it the job of the artist to produce hope? I don't know. I definitely don't want to be guilty of the production of cruel optimism, of saying something to reproduce our belief in this system that is completely cannibalistic. I don't want to do that. But I also want to test a few things. There are unwritten possibilities of history, and they didn't stay unwritten or unrealized because they were not good ideas. They stayed unrealized because there's things called power, right, that kept them suppressed, invisible, and unachievable. But I think that's probably the way I think about it is the job of the artist to think about culture through various times in order to recuperate any losses and to kind of bring them forward. So I'm not that pessimistic because for no reason at all, people decide to create in the midst of destruction. I mean, what's up with that? And that's why I'm like, the human is a stain that can never be cleaned. No matter how much modernity insists that they're, fall in line. I'm here to cheer you up. I didn't know you were bummed out.
Hey, thank you so much. This was great. I have a more formal question, and I think this might be interesting for sculpture in general for our department. When you're showing your work, how do you put all your materials in the material list? Is it important to you that your plastic that you're using is formed by you and recycled? Is that in your materials list, or is that something that you just assume people know or find out later?
I blow out, the wall tax. I'm like, that wall tax is not big enough as a space to kind of really talk about the history of what it took to make this artwork. It's also just a shame too that only one name goes into that, and I'm really opposed to this, right? And so my wall text is usually a very well produced video that is going to be functional for my classes, for any kind of workshop that I'm doing. That wall text is documentary. And the wall text is just a very docile didactic. And I'm like, no way, man, I'm making video. I tell you all about my materials. And if it took there was 1 ounce of tears used in this artwork, then it'll be listed. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for your wonderful talk.
Thank you.
I'm Ruben. I'm in 4D. There's a couple other 4D folks here.
Awesome.
I just always notice whenever someone else says 4D, so it's I wrote it down. And when you were talking about building a notion of durational time, kind of like this onion or this radiating, I guess, demonstrating motion. A word that has been coming up in our departmental readings a lot is retrofuturism. It's been showing up in some crits too.
Ooh, nice.
Which is this idea of like going to previous historical periods and looking at how they envisioned the future, and like using that visual language, like some, maybe like late 70s modernist chairs, which came up in a crit today. And I love that you said, I wanted to be a modernist. I would love to be a modernist. And you being here at Cranbrook, I feel like with the climate crisis, we do kind of live in this indictment of modernism. Like this is my opinion, but it feels like it's less a discussion about like whether it's succeeded or not. We're just like living in this decline, which maybe does get to what Yasmin is talking about, this like irrefutable, unavoidable sense of, decline or hopelessness. And many artists are shifting towards trying to, somehow keep moving forward in spite of it and engaging these new materials. Not to be comment, not question guy, but you did ask us a question.
Yeah, no, I'm very interested, Ruben.
Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to share that we've been thinking a lot about like speculative design objects and like practices of futurism in the 4D department around like using objects to imagine futures.
Right.
And so these objects as they exist like in front of us now as art objects are maybe quasi-functional, like a gesture at a function or like, their conversation starter. So I don't know. Those are just some resonances that I appreciated. It felt like there is this aspiration toward a future of maybe of survival, where we're still here, living in plastic houses. And yeah, to flip it back on you, like, do you think about these as objects that exist in the future, or like your works in a timeline? Like you were talking about not thinking about the 17th century. Are you thinking about like people from the future coming back and looking at this? I guess it's called future fossils.
I think like
Yeah.
that's the art part was like that geode, right? Like I was like,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just remembered it's called future fossils. It's literally called future fossils.
yeah. And
But
so
thanks.
that was the kind of like imaginative leap to kind of like think about what is the waste that will be seen from the future, and obviously the plastic rocks are real, and they're actual evidences of the time that we're in. And then I kind of thought, why, is it part of the job of the artist to also help understand the present, like to help kind of make the present conceivable? Because it doesn't seem like the representations that we're surrounded with kind of like speak to this alarm. And so part of the aesthetics of the sculptures was, how do I kind of use aesthetics with an ethical bent, to kind of speak to a realization of where we are in time. And so the project operated in those terms. But then, the nice thing about art is like you kind of let your mind leap and then you play this game of speculation and stuff. But don't end there, because the speculation kind of was like a real challenge. The students are really in front of you. And you're not going to end that speculation without application. Right? And so when it was time to apply, I did some deep research into architecture and manufacture and to take a look at 1970s, what you're calling, Ruben, retrofuturism. Maybe it's even part of my job in my short little life, right? That I can bring forward things that were talked about in the 1970s and that it could be 2023 and I can bring them up and not let them die as ideas. And so then it was like material invention, where it went from speculation to application, right? And now from application to exercise, like, because now these shipping containers land and then they they present the circular economy. They actively divert plastics from the waste streams and then produce spaces from the plastics that's diverted. Now, I want you to know, like, this stuff is not new. Like, if you go to like the UK, like you go to their the super their shopping malls, you will see pressed plastics. That are like the displays for fashion. Like color is huge in plastics, and they're like super colorific. They're beautiful. They look galactical, and so they're being used they're already actively being used. So, it's even a challenge. You know what I mean? Like, people in production and design and manufacture are making beautiful things, and we're still using materials that are what? I don't know. But I do know this. Truth, in fact, is that when I was a college student, both undergrad and graduate, I was broke as a joke. And I was able to take out loans to pay for institutional tuitions, but I couldn't gather like $1,000 to make an artwork. And so that is a very real thing about the conditions of my production. I didn't own it. I actually would have to actively go broke to make artwork. So this was also interesting to me in terms of like, yeah, I can break your heart and make a beautiful sculpture. It's going to be black and beautiful, and it's made out of coffee. It's going to smell great. And it's going to cost me probably a couple of gallons of milk. And that really matters too, right? I would have to say that it does something to the artistic experience, because the work that my students are making are so unidentifiable and mesmerizingly beautiful. You don't know how to speak because the materials are so unknown, and so I think it's very interesting territory to be in terms of a practice. Retrofuturism, it's great. Past versions of the future. It's time to think about that now, right? So maybe I don't want to leave you at the thought that you're making work as if you're operating in the 17th century. Don't stop there. Make work from multiple vantage points of time, right? Let them all coexist at the same time and see what kind of trouble we can make in the studio. So now you can just actively select to work in time and stuff. You guys feeling good, cozy? It started snowing today, First day of snow, you're supposed to be with friends. So thanks for inviting me to be here.